It was supposed to be peaceful, just a few hours of late-night fishing to clear my head. I'd been working long shifts and hadn't had a proper break in weeks, so I decided to drive out to the old pier by the lake. It's not the kind of place most people go anymore. The dock's half-rotted, the wood soft and warped from years of rain, but it always felt calm there. I liked how quiet it was. That evening, the air felt colder than it should have been for late summer. The water was still like glass, reflecting the last traces of sunlight. The only sound came from the boards creaking under my boots and the faint buzz of mosquitoes around the lantern. I remember thinking how empty it all seemed, like the lake was holding its breath. I set up my rod and tossed the line in. The ripples spread slowly across the surface, breaking the perfect reflection. For a long time, nothing happened. I just sat there listening to the soft groan of the pier shifting with the water. It was peaceful at first. Then I started to notice how quiet it had become. No insects, no frogs, not even the usual rustle from the trees. Just stillness. The kind of silence that feels thick, like sound itself has been drained out of the air. A chill went down my back. I remember looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the dock, but there was no one there. Just the dark outline of trees and the faint shimmer of moonlight across the lake. The water beside my line rippled again, but this time I hadn't moved it. I leaned forward, squinting, thinking maybe I'd snagged something. The rod began to bend slowly, the line growing tight, and for a moment, I felt a rush of excitement. I thought I'd hooked something big, but when I started reeling it in, something felt wrong. The pull wasn't sharp like a fish fighting. It was slow, steady, like whatever was on the other end was deliberately resisting me. My heart started to race as I felt it drag back, heavier, stronger than anything I'd caught before. Now the pier creaked beneath my feet as I leaned forward, trying to see into the water. That's when I saw movement just below the surface, a pale shape gliding toward the dock. It didn't move like a fish. It didn't even ripple the water right. The shape stopped directly beneath me. I held my breath. Then, the line went slack all at once. I stared down, waiting for bubbles or any sign of what I'd hooked. But there was nothing. Just dark. Still water reflecting my lantern light. And then, for the briefest moment, another reflection appeared beside mine. Someone else's face. I froze, staring into the water. The reflection beside mine was faint, like it was just under the surface, but I could see the shape of a face. Pale skin, dark eyes, and a mouth that didn't move. It wasn't distorted by the water like it should have been. It looked too real, too still. I blinked, and it was gone. The water went flat again, reflecting only the lantern and the edge of the pier. My pulse was hammering in my ears, and I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe a shadow, maybe the light. But the more I told myself that, the less I believed it. I reeled the line in completely and set the rod down. My hands were shaking. I told myself I'd give it 5 minutes, just to calm down. Then I'd pack up and leave. The lake was quiet again, perfectly calm, but there was a tension in the air that made my skin crawl. That's when I heard something behind me, footsteps on the old wooden planks. Slow, careful. I turned immediately, expecting to see another fisherman, but there was no one there. The pier stretched out empty, the end disappearing into the dark. I held the lantern higher, scanning the length of the dock. The light didn't reach far. Everything beyond a few meters just faded into shadow. I swallowed hard, trying to slow my breathing. The air smelled different now, thicker, like wet metal and mud. I crouched down to start packing my gear, telling myself I just needed to leave. The lantern flickered a little, making the shadows on the water shift. That's when I saw the ripples again, broad, moving toward the pier. Something was surfacing. The pale shape rose slowly, just beneath the reflection of the moon. It looked like a person, or at least the outline of one. The head tilted upward, but the rest of the body didn't move. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, my chest tight. Then the face broke the surface. It wasn't gasping for air or moving like a swimmer. It just floated there, staring straight at me, eyes open, unblinking. The skin was pale, the lips almost gray. It looked alive, but wrong somehow, like it was waiting for something. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the tackle box. My breath came out in short bursts, every instinct screaming at me to run. The lantern light caught the surface again, and the face began to sink, slowly, disappearing beneath the water without a sound. The ripples spread outward, reaching the pier. One of them lapped against my boot. The water was cold, colder than it should have been for the season. That's when I realized something else. My fishing line was still hanging off the dock. It had caught again, but this time, the end of the line wasn't moving. It was stretched tight, leading straight down into the dark water, and it was pulling back. The line tugged again, slow, steady, deliberate. I could feel it through the wooden boards beneath me. The faint vibration, as if something deep below was testing the weight. My hands were trembling, but I grabbed the rod anyway, just to cut the line and be done with it. Before I could, the lantern dimmed. The flame flickered low, turning everything around me into blurred shadows. I pulled out my pocket knife, crouched by the edge, and reached for the line. The water was black and motionless again, but the tension in the line stayed. Whatever was down there hadn't let go. I leaned a little closer. That's when I saw it. A hand broke the surface. It was pale and waterlogged, fingers thin and colorless, gripping the edge of the pier just inches from my boots. I stumbled backward so hard I fell, the knife clattering against the boards. My heart was pounding so loud it hurt. I kicked at the boards, trying to push myself away, but the hand didn't move. It just gripped the wood, holding tight, the water dripping from its fingers. Then slowly another hand appeared beside it, and then inch by inch a head began to rise. The same face I'd seen reflected in the water, the same empty eyes. I scrambled to my feet and ran. My boots slammed against the wood, each step shaking the pier, but I didn't care. I didn't look back until I reached the gravel road that led to my truck. When I finally turned, the pier was empty again. The lake was calm, perfectly still, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The lantern was still faintly glowing at the end of the dock, casting a small circle of light on the boards, and then something moved within that light. A ripple, small but deliberate, spreading outward from the pier. I got in my truck and drove away without packing a thing. When I came back the next afternoon with a friend, everything was just as I'd left it, except for one thing. My fishing rod was gone. The line, the hook, the reel, everything. The lantern was still there, though, sitting at the edge of the dock, unlit but dry, as if someone had carefully placed it back. We looked out across the lake. The water was still, calm, peaceful. But my friend pointed something out, something that made my stomach drop. Right where my line had been the night before, just beneath the surface. A piece of fabric floated gently, faded, torn, and tangled, with what looked like thin strands of hair. I never went back after that. I don't even fish anymore. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I think about that hand on the edge of the pier, how cold it looked, how tightly it held on. And I can't help wondering if, somewhere beneath that still water, it's still waiting. I used to fish every weekend back then. It was my way of getting away from people. And noise, just me, the water, and a few hours of quiet. There's a lake about 40 minutes from my old place, surrounded by thick woods. Most people didn't go there because it wasn't on any main road, and the path leading down to it was half hidden by weeds. That's exactly why I liked it. It was mid-autumn, the air starting to cool, but not cold enough for frost yet. I remember the smell of damp earth and pine needles when I arrived. The sky was already dim, with that dull orange fading into gray that only lasts for a few minutes before night. I set up my chair on a small patch of gravel near the water's edge. The lake was calm, flat, silent, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. For the first hour, nothing happened. I watched the line, sipped my coffee, listened to the trees rustle softly in the wind. Then, just as the sun disappeared behind the ridge, the sounds started to fade. The breeze stopped. The insects quieted. Even the trees seemed to stop moving. I noticed it because the silence felt wrong, too sudden. I told myself it was normal, maybe a change in air pressure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. My breathing grew louder to me, like it was the only sound left. Around that time, I thought I saw movement out on the water. Just a small ripple at first, then another farther out. I leaned forward, squinting, waiting for something to break the surface, but nothing did. The ripples faded, and the lake went still again. I should have packed up then, but I didn't. I told myself it was just a fish, maybe a big one. I wanted to catch it. About 15 minutes later, I felt something tug on the line. Not hard, but steady. I grabbed the rod and gave it a light pull. Whatever was on the other end didn't react the way a fish usually does. It didn't dart or struggle. It just moved slow and deliberate, like it was being dragged across the bottom. The tension in the line grew heavier, and I started to reel it in, but it barely budged. It was as if I'd hooked something solid, something rooted. I thought maybe it was a branch or a log, but when I tried pulling harder, the line pulled back. That stopped me cold. I remember my throat going dry. My first thought was that someone was under the water, holding the line. The idea didn't make sense, but I couldn't explain the weight, the resistance. Then the water near the end of my line started to stir, slowly, like a gentle swirl forming in place. I leaned closer, the lantern light barely reaching that far. Something pale moved just beneath the surface, smooth and round. I thought it was a fish's belly at first, but then I saw the shape of it. Eyes. 2 eyes, open, staring up from under the water. I froze, gripping the handle of my rod so tightly my fingers ached. The eyes didn't blink or move. They just stared, pale and glassy, from beneath the surface. I couldn't see the rest of its face, just that faint oval shape in the dark water. For a second, I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, a reflection, anything my brain could make sense of. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became that it was real. Then the line went slack, completely loose, as if whatever had been holding it had let go. I stumbled back a step, my heart hammering so hard I could hear the blood in my ears. The ripples faded. The lake became still again, smooth as glass. I wanted to leave right then, but my legs wouldn't move. I kept staring at that same patch of water, waiting for something to break the surface again. Nothing did. The stillness pressed against me like a weight. Finally, I forced myself to reel the line back in. The hook came up empty. No bait. Just the faint smell of something foul, like rotting algae. I packed my things quickly, trying not to look at the water again. My lantern flickered once, weakly, and the darkness seemed to close in a little tighter around me. My breathing came in short, uneven bursts. I told myself I was just tired, imagining things. I just needed to get back to the car. The path to the parking spot was narrow, covered in leaves that muffled my steps. Every few feet, I found myself glancing back toward the lake, half expecting to see someone or something standing there. But it was empty, at least from what I could see. The silence was absolute. When I finally reached the car, I opened the door and tossed everything inside. The air smelled different, thicker, damp, as if the lake had followed me. I stood there for a moment, hand on the door, trying to calm down. My pulse was still racing, and I could feel the sweat cooling on my back. I told myself I'd drive straight home, that I'd forget about this. But as I turned to shut the door, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Across the dirt road, near the tree line, someone was standing. It was hard to see clearly in the dim light, but the figure looked tall and thin, arms hanging close to its sides. I thought maybe it was another fisherman, but no one else ever came out here this late. My headlights were pointing away from the lake, so only a faint glow from the lantern reached that part of the woods. The figure didn't move. I squinted, trying to make out a face, but there wasn't one. Or maybe there was, but it was turned slightly away, just enough that I couldn't see it clearly. My chest tightened. I didn't call out. I didn't even breathe. I just got into the car and slammed the door shut. I started the engine and turned the lights on. There was nothing there. The spot where I'd seen the figure was empty. The trees swayed gently in the night breeze, and for a moment, I convinced myself it had been a shadow. I shifted into gear and drove off, gravel crunching under the tires. But when I checked the rearview mirror, I saw a faint shape standing on the edge of the road, facing the direction I'd gone. I didn't look again after that. I just kept driving, staring straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The road was uneven, and the headlights cut through the fog that had started to form near the ground. Every instinct in me screamed not to stop, not to slow down. When I finally reached the main road, I felt some of the tension drain out of me. The silence in my head was replaced by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic sound of the tires. I told myself it had to be exhaustion, that I'd imagined the whole thing. I wanted to believe that. When I got home, I left all my gear in the car and went straight inside. I didn't even turn on the lights at first. The quiet of my living room felt safer than the outside world, but the smell of the lake still lingered on me. Damp earth, algae, something faintly metallic. I couldn't shake it. I showered, changed, sat on the couch for a while, trying to convince myself everything was fine. But I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes beneath the water, how still they'd been, how the figure by the trees hadn't moved at all. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, a trick of the dark. I almost believed it. The next morning, sunlight filled the room, and for a moment I laughed at myself. Everything seemed normal. I went out to the car to grab my gear. But when I opened the trunk, something wasn't right. My fishing line was stretched out across the floor of the trunk, unspooled completely, tangled and wet. The hook was missing. I checked my hands instinctively, feeling that old rush of fear crawl up my arms. The rest of my equipment was bone dry, but that single line was soaked, dripping onto the carpet. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for logic to make sense of it. Maybe the trunk had leaked, maybe dew, maybe something I'd overlooked. But the air smelled faintly of the lake again, that same heavy, stagnant scent. I cleaned it up, closed the trunk, and tried to move on, but I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house made me tense. Every shadow felt too still. And somewhere, deep down, I started to wonder if I hadn't brought something back with me. A week passed. Then one night, I woke up suddenly with the strangest feeling. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't alone. The air felt thick again, humid, like it had at the lake. My skin was damp and I could hear faint breathing, slow and steady, that didn't belong to me. I turned my head toward the window. Outside, the glass was fogged from the inside, and through that thin layer of moisture, I could make out a handprint pressed against it. Long fingers. Too long. I stayed completely still, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't move, didn't blink, barely breathed. The shape behind the glass didn't move either. It just stayed there, like it was waiting. When the sun came up, the handprint was gone. I moved out a month later. I sold everything, my gear, my car, even the house. I don't fish anymore. I don't go near lakes, rivers, or even ponds. But sometimes late at night, when everything goes quiet, I still catch the faint scent of that same stagnant water. And when I do, I can feel those same eyes watching from somewhere nearby, waiting for me to cast another line. It started like any other fishing trip. I'd been working long hours and needed some time alone, so I drove out to a small reservoir about an hour from my place. It wasn't a popular spot. Most people said the fish weren't worth the drive, but I liked it that way. No crowds, no noise, just still water and the sound of my own breathing. The road there was quiet, lined with trees that leaned so far inward they almost touched above the car. By the time I arrived, the sun had already dipped behind the hills, leaving a soft, gray light that bled into the water. I sat up near the edge of the bank, where the dirt turned dark and muddy. The air was damp, and every breath felt heavy, like it clung to the back of my throat. For a while, it was peaceful. I could hear the faint hum of insects and the occasional splash of fish breaking the surface. I cast my line, sat back, and watched the last of the daylight fade. I remember feeling calm, completely alone in a good way. But as the sky darkened, something began to change. At first it was subtle. The sounds around me faded one by one. The crickets, the rustle of the leaves, even the water seemed to grow quieter until there was nothing but my own breathing. It was strange, but not enough to make me pack up. I told myself it was just the night settling in. Then I noticed the air. It had gone colder, but not like the usual chill after sunset. It was deeper, heavier, almost unnatural. My skin prickled as I sat there, gripping the handle of my rod a little tighter. I don't know how long I sat like that before I saw the first ripple. Just a small movement in the middle of the reservoir. I leaned forward, squinting, thinking maybe it was a fish. But the ripples didn't spread outward, they stayed in place, like something was moving in circles beneath the surface. I stared for a long time, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Then my line went tight. The pull was strong, too strong for this place. I stood up quickly, both hands on the rod, trying to steady it. The reel screamed as the line stretched farther and farther into the water. My pulse hammered in my ears. Whatever I'd caught wasn't fighting like a fish. It wasn't jerking or diving. It was just pulling. I tried to reel in, but it was like tugging against something that didn't move. I could feel the vibration running through the line, steady and deliberate. I took one step closer to the edge, peering into the dark water. That's when I saw it. A pale shape, just below the surface. Long, thin, unmoving. For a second, I thought it was a branch, maybe something caught in the line, but then it turned. It turned upward. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The line went slack, and the surface of the water smoothed over as if nothing had been there. I stood there for a long time, too afraid to move, staring into the reflection of the moon. Then, just before I forced myself to leave, I saw something that froze me completely. In the reflection, just beside mine, there was another face. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just stared at the surface, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The face in the reflection wasn't clear. It looked blurred, like it was beneath a thin layer of fog. But I could make out the shape of eyes, wide and dark, staring straight back at me. I turned around fast, my chest tight, expecting someone to be standing behind me. But there was nothing. Just the trees, still and silent, and the faint glow of my lantern. I told myself it had to be an illusion, the water playing tricks, the light shifting. I tried to believe that. But when I looked back, the reflection was gone. My hands were trembling. I reeled the rest of the line in, half expecting something to be caught on the hook, but it came up empty. The hook itself was bent slightly, like it had caught on something heavy. I decided that was enough fishing for the night. I packed up fast, shoving everything into the back of my truck. The air felt colder now, almost wet against my skin. As I started walking toward the car, the sound of my boots crunching against the gravel echoed too loudly. Each step made me more aware of the silence surrounding me. No wind, no insects, no sound at all except my breathing. About halfway to the truck, I stopped. I didn't know why, just a sudden feeling, like something was watching me. My pulse quickened. I turned my head slowly toward the water. There was a shape standing near the spot where I'd been fishing. At first, I thought maybe someone had wandered over, maybe another night fisherman, but it wasn't moving. It was standing perfectly still, too still, facing the water. The moonlight reflected off its surface, revealing something pale and wet clinging to its frame. It looked wrong. Too long in the arms, too narrow in the shoulders. I didn't breathe. My mind scrambled to find some explanation, any explanation. A trick of the light, a shadow, my imagination. But I knew what I saw wasn't a shadow. It was solid, real. Then it began to move. Not toward me, just slightly, enough for me to see the way it turned its head. Slowly, deliberately. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I could feel its gaze. My throat tightened, and I stumbled backward. The lantern flickered faintly in my hand as I ran the rest of the way to the truck. I threw everything inside, slammed the door, and sat there for a moment, breathing hard. My heart wouldn't slow down. I told myself to just drive, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing toward the lake one last time. The figure was gone, but the water wasn't still anymore. It was rippling, softly, like something had slipped beneath the surface again. I drove off, the gravel spraying under the tires, eyes fixed on the narrow road ahead. Even as I left the forest behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. The smell of damp earth clung to my clothes, and every shadow outside the headlights looked like it was moving. That night, when I finally got home, I checked the back of the truck before going inside. Everything looked normal. But my fishing rod, the one that had bent, was wet. I stared at the rod for a long time, my breath shallow. I hadn't been near water since I'd packed up. Every other piece of gear was dry, but the rod was dripping, fresh water beading down the handle, pooling slightly on the truck bed. I told myself maybe it was condensation. Maybe I'd missed a spot when I packed, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The air was dry all the way home. I left everything outside that night. I didn't even bother cleaning the gear like I usually did. I just locked the doors, drew the curtains, and sat in silence. The stillness of the lake lingered in my mind, the way it had gone quiet, how the air had changed, how that reflection looked almost human, but not quite. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image, the pale shape turning in the water, the face in the reflection beside mine. When morning came, it felt like I dreamed the whole thing, but the damp marks on my driveway where the rod had been told me otherwise. The next day, I tried to go about my routine. Work, errands, anything to forget. But something felt off. My hands kept shaking when I wasn't thinking about it. At random moments, I'd catch the faint smell of the lake, the same heavy, earthy scent, and it made my stomach turn. 3 nights later, I woke up to the sound of water, faint, steady. I thought maybe it was raining, but when I looked outside, the sky was clear. Then I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the hallway. I didn't want to move, but curiosity forced me up. My heartbeat felt uneven, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the hall, there was nothing there, just a faint trail of wetness on the floor leading toward the back door. The door was closed, but there was a small puddle right in front of it. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, my pulse echoing in my ears. Finally, I turned on every light in the house, checked every window, every lock. Nothing. No sign of anyone getting in. I told myself it had to be a leak, or maybe something had spilled, but I couldn't find the source. The next morning, the puddle was gone. I threw out the fishing rod after that. I didn't even touch it. I just wrapped it in plastic and left it by the garbage bins. I figured that would be the end of it. But a week later, when I went out to my truck, it was sitting in the bed again, clean, dry. I sold the truck the next day and moved apartments 2 months later. I don't fish anymore. I don't even go near lakes if I can avoid it. But sometimes, when the air feels thick and cold, and everything around me goes quiet, I get the same feeling I did that night. Like something is still waiting, something that remembers me, something that wants me to come back. I used to go fishing a lot back then, mostly alone. There's this old lake about 30 minutes outside town, hidden behind a row of pine trees and half-forgotten trails. Locals said it used to be a quarry before it filled with rainwater, but I never saw any signs of machinery, just dark water, still as glass, and the sound of insects echoing through the night. That night, I went out later than usual. It was already close to midnight when I parked by the tree line. I remember the air being unusually heavy, like the air before a storm, except the sky was completely clear. The moon was full, and its reflection stretched across the surface of the lake, trembling slightly with every ripple. I set up near the old wooden dock, a place I'd fished dozens of times before. The first few hours were calm. Nothing but the sound of my line slicing through the water and the quiet hum of crickets. Every so often I'd hear something move in the distance, maybe a raccoon, maybe something larger. But that wasn't unusual for that area. What was strange was how the nights seemed to get quieter the longer I stayed. The wind stopped. Even the crickets faded out. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. Around 2 a.m., I felt the first bite. The rod jerked suddenly, hard enough to almost pull from my hands. I pulled back, expecting a big one, but whatever was on the other end was wrong. It didn't move like a fish. It didn't dart or pull. It just dragged, slowly, heavily, like I'd hooked into something that didn't want to fight, only to pull me closer. The water started to stir near the end of the dock, and I leaned forward to get a better look. I swear I saw a shape rise beneath the surface, something pale, almost human. But before I could process what I was seeing, the line snapped with a sharp crack, and the rod flung backward. I fell hard onto the dock. When I looked back at the water, it was perfectly still again. I remember sitting there, heart pounding, staring at the spot where the line had broken. The rational part of me tried to explain it away. A big catfish, maybe a snag, but something about it didn't fit. The water wasn't deep enough for a fish that large, and that pale movement under the surface still burned in my mind. I decided to pack up. But when I reached for my lantern, I noticed something strange. The light, which had been steady all night, began to dim slightly. Not flicker, just fade, like something was draining the brightness out of it. I checked the fuel, still plenty left. My breathing got shallow. I felt a sudden pressure in the air like I wasn't alone anymore. That's when I heard it. The sound of something moving in the water again. Not splashing, just shifting, slowly. Like something was crawling just beneath the surface, circling the dock. I stood up, every muscle in my body tense. Then I saw it. Just under the surface, near the reflection of the moon, something was staring back at me. Two eyes, wide open, unmoving, and they were human. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Those eyes didn't blink or move. They just hovered beneath the water, perfectly still, perfectly aware. My hands went cold, and I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my throat. I kept telling myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection, something logical, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then, as if realizing I had seen it, the eyes began to sink. Slowly, the pale face disappeared beneath the surface until there was only the ripple of disturbed water. I waited, staring at the same spot for what felt like minutes, afraid to look away. When nothing else happened, I forced myself to grab my gear. My fingers shook so badly that I dropped my tackle box into the dirt. The sound unnaturally loud in the silence. I tried to convince myself to leave right then, but my car was parked down a narrow trail through the trees, maybe 100 meters away. That distance suddenly felt endless. I swung my lantern toward the path, the fading light barely cutting through the dark. The air smelled strange, damp, earthy, like algae mixed with something sour. I started walking fast, my boots crunching softly on the dead leaves. After maybe 20 steps, I heard a sound behind me, something dragging through the shallow water. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, faster now, trying to ignore how the hairs on my arms were standing straight up. My mind was racing. Maybe a deer went to drink. Maybe the current shifted, but the dragging didn't stop. It was following me, keeping pace with my steps closer to the edge of the lake. I could almost feel it matching my rhythm. I gripped the lantern tighter, forcing myself not to run because some instinct told me that running would make it worse. When I reached the tree line, I stopped. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I was imagining it. I turned my head slowly toward the lake. At first, I didn't see anything. The surface looked calm again, almost beautiful in the moonlight. But then, just beyond the dock, something rose out of the water. Not fast, just steady, deliberate. It was shaped like a person, but wrong in ways I couldn't put into words. Its arms were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and that same pale skin glistened beneath the moonlight, slick and still dripping. It stood there, half submerged, facing me. I couldn't see its mouth, but I could feel that it was smiling. Not in a friendly way. More like it recognized me. Like it had been waiting. My body finally reacted. I ran. Branches whipped against my arms, my legs stumbled over roots. But I didn't stop. I could hear the water moving behind me again, heavier this time, as if something had stepped out of it. The air felt thicker with every breath. My chest burning, my vision shaking with panic. When I reached the car, I fumbled the keys, dropping them once, twice, before finally jamming them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I hit the headlights. In the beam of light, I saw footprints, wet ones, leading from the direction of the lake, straight to where I was parked. The footprints glistened on the dirt road, perfectly shaped, human, but too long, the toes stretched unnaturally. My stomach twisted as I followed the trail with my eyes. They stopped right beside my driver's door. Right beside me. I didn't look around. I didn't want to see anything else. I slammed the gear into reverse, tires spinning over the dirt, the sound echoing through the trees. The lake disappeared behind me, swallowed by the darkness. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main road, my hands still trembling on the wheel. Even then, I could still smell it, that sour, earthy scent clinging to my jacket and skin, like something from the bottom of the lake had come with me. I rolled the windows down, but it didn't help. When I finally got home, it was almost 4 a.m. I sat in the driveway for a long time, trying to convince myself I'd imagined everything. The footprints, the shape, those eyes, all of it. Eventually, I forced myself inside, tossed my gear in the garage, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale figure, standing half submerged, staring. The way it moved, or didn't move, kept replaying in my mind. I told myself I'd never go back to that lake again. A few days later, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My fishing rod, the one that had snapped that night, was leaning against the side of the house. I hadn't brought it back. I was sure of it. I remembered it breaking, the line snapping, the handle flying out of my hands. Yet there it was, clean, dry, like it had never touched the water. For a while, I tried not to think about it. I told myself someone must have found it and dropped it off, though I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone that night. Still, the thought lingered. Every time I stepped outside, I'd catch a faint scent of that same damp, sour smell near the garage. A week passed. Then one evening, I went out to take the trash. It was almost dark, the last bit of sunlight fading behind the trees. As I walked back toward the door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a wet footprint on the concrete, leading from the side of the house toward the backyard. Just one. It was faint, but fresh. I stood there for a long time, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't follow it. I couldn't. Instead, I went inside, locked every door, and sat by the window, staring out at the yard until the night swallowed everything. I moved out a few months later. I never went fishing again. Sometimes, though, late at night, I still dream about the lake. I see the reflection of the moon trembling on the surface. I feel the weight of something pulling on the line, slow and deliberate. And every time, just before I wake up, I see those same eyes staring up through the water, watching, waiting. This happened 2 summers ago, and I still don't have an explanation for it. I used to go night fishing a lot back then. It was my way of clearing my head, just me, the water, and the quiet. I'd done it hundreds of times before, never had a problem. But that night was different. It was the first and last time I ever went to Black Hollow Lake. A friend had told me about it, a small, secluded place surrounded by thick forest, supposedly untouched and great for bass. He warned me that it was tricky to find, said the trails weren't marked anymore, but that didn't bother me. I liked the idea of being alone, away from people. I got there just before sundown. The dirt road leading in was rough, full of ruts and overgrown brush scraping against the sides of my truck. When I finally parked, the air was heavy and still, like everything was holding its breath. No wind, no insects, no sound. The lake itself was beautiful at first glance, smooth as glass, stretching out under a sky turning purple and gold. I walked down to the old wooden dock, its boards soft and uneven from age. It gave slightly under my boots as I set up my gear. The air smelled like damp wood and algae, sharp and earthy. By the time I cast my first line, the last bit of daylight was gone. The water turned black, reflecting only the faint shimmer of the moon. My lantern flickered beside me. the light swaying gently over the surface. I could see the reflection of my own face in the ripples. It was calm, too calm. Usually, you'd hear something at a lake at night, the buzz of mosquitoes, the croak of frogs, the distant splash of fish. But that night, there was nothing. Just silence. I told myself it was fine. Maybe it was just that kind of place. I sat there for what felt like an hour, casting, reeling, waiting. The lantern hissed softly, and every so often I thought I heard the faintest sound from across the water. Not quite a voice, but something low and muffled. I ignored it. Then the line went tight. It wasn't a quick pull like when a fish bites. It was slow, steady, and strong. I gripped the rod tighter, leaning back to reel it in, but it didn't move. It felt like I'd hooked onto a log or something heavy resting on the bottom. I pulled again, harder this time, but it didn't budge. Then suddenly, the line started moving. Something on the other end was pulling. It wasn't fast or erratic. It was a slow, deliberate drag, like whatever it was had weight to it. My pulse picked up, and I remember whispering, "What the hell is that?" under my breath. I started reeling slowly, my hands slick with sweat. As I did, the lantern flickered again, the light dimming for just a moment. When it steadied, I saw the line stretching out straight across the surface of the water. Whatever was on the other end was coming closer. I stood up, the boards of the dock creaking softly beneath my boots. My heart was hammering in my chest now. I expected to see ripples, splashing, something, but the water stayed perfectly still. Then the line went slack. Just like that. I reeled it in quickly, expecting to see my hook torn or the bait gone. But when I brought it up, the hook was bent completely sideways, as if something had twisted it with force. I stared at it, my hands trembling slightly, when I noticed movement in the corner of my eye, something drifting on the water's surface about 20 feet out. It looked like a piece of clothing, something dark, soaked, floating slowly toward me. At first, I thought it was just trash, maybe a jacket or a tarp caught in the current. But the water wasn't moving, and it was coming straight toward the dock. My flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it over the surface. The light hit the thing, and I realized it wasn't a piece of fabric at all. It looked like a sleeve, a coat sleeve, and beneath it, something pale. I took a step back, the dock creaking under my weight. The thing kept drifting closer until it was only a few feet away. The water lapped gently against the wood, and that's when I saw it clearly. It was an arm, a human arm, limp and swollen, the fingers half curled as it floated on its side. I froze. My first thought was that someone had drowned here, maybe recently. I felt my stomach twist as I forced myself to look closer, my light shaking across the surface. The arm moved slightly, as if caught by a current. But there was no current. The rest of the body wasn't visible, just the arm floating too close, too deliberate. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my tackle box. The sound echoed across the still water, and for a moment, I swore I saw something else just below the surface. A shadow, long and shapeless, slipping past under the reflection of the moon. I wanted to run, but I couldn't make my legs move. My chest felt tight, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears faster and faster. My flashlight caught something else a few feet beyond the arm. Something pale, round. It was a face, half submerged, eyes open, mouth just barely above the waterline. It didn't look like it was floating. It looked like it was watching. I stumbled back again, breathing hard, my whole body shaking. The dock shifted beneath me, one of the boards creaking under my heel. I didn't care about my gear anymore. I just grabbed the lantern and turned to run. That's when I saw footprints. They were faint, pressed into the damp wood. Not mine, bare feet. Small, spaced unevenly. as if someone had been walking there barefoot not long before I arrived. My breath caught in my throat. The air felt heavier, colder. I backed away slowly, my light trembling across the dock. Then, from the corner of my vision, I saw the arm again. But this time, it wasn't floating. It was reaching up. The hand had turned, fingers stretching toward the edge of the dock, gripping the wood just below where I'd been standing seconds earlier. Water trickled between the planks as the fingers curled around them. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The lantern flickered again, throwing shadows across the surface, and I thought I saw a shape rising beneath the water. Something was coming up. I turned and ran. I don't even remember grabbing my bag or my rod. I just remember my boots slamming against the path, the sound of my breathing, the tightness in my chest. I didn't stop until I saw the outline of my truck through the trees. When I reached it, I fumbled for my keys with shaking hands, almost dropping them twice. I got the door open, climbed in, and slammed it shut. For a long moment, I just sat there, gasping, staring out through the windshield at the darkness beyond the trail. Then I saw something move near the edge of the trees, something pale, just standing there watching me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe the moon catching on the trees, but then it shifted, slowly. The shape was unmistakably human. It stood at the edge of the path, motionless, its head tilted slightly to one side. I couldn't make out its features, only that it was pale and thin, like something that had been underwater too long. My breathing quickened. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so hard they hurt. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just sat there, staring through the glass, waiting for it to disappear. But it didn't. It stayed there, barely visible through the mist that had started to creep in from the lake. Then, in one slow motion, it stepped back into the trees and was gone. That broke whatever paralysis had been holding me. I started the engine and slammed my foot on the gas. The tires spun in the mud before catching traction, and the truck lurched forward down the narrow trail. The branches scraped against the sides as I sped through, my heart pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. By the time I hit the main road, I was shaking so badly I had to pull over. I sat there for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, that I'd fallen asleep for a second, that stress had made me see things that weren't there. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that arm reaching out of the water, the way it had gripped the wood. When I finally got home, I left my gear in the truck and went straight inside. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just locked the doors, closed every curtain, and sat on the couch until the sun came up. The next day, I told a friend about it, half laughing, trying to make it sound like a story instead of something that had actually happened. He looked at me for a long time before saying, "You went to Black Hollow?" I nodded. He told me people used to swim there years ago, before the lake was closed off. Said a man drowned out there one night. They never found his body, just his boat drifting near the center, and an arm tangled in his fishing line. The story made me sick to my stomach. I haven't gone fishing since. My gear still sits in the back of my truck, untouched, covered in dust. But sometimes, when I park near a lake or drive past a stretch of still water, I swear I see something just below the surface. Not movement exactly, more like the faint outline of a hand. And when I blink, it's gone. Still, every time I think back to that night, I can't shake one thought. That hand I saw gripping the dock, it didn't look like it was reaching out for help. It looked like it was reaching up to pull something down. It was early autumn, the air cool enough that my breath came out faint and white in the dim light. I'd gone fishing alone, like I usually did when I needed to think. There's a small lake about an hour outside my town, no signs, no marked trails, just a dirt path that cuts through the woods until it opens up to the water. It's the kind of place you'd miss unless someone told you it was there. That night, I reached it just before sunset. The sky was painted in streaks of red and orange, fading fast. I remember how quiet it was. Too quiet, even for that area. Usually you'd hear crickets or frogs starting up by that hour, but all I heard was the sound of my boots crunching through the dried leaves. I set up my gear near an old wooden pier that had probably been built decades ago. The boards groaned under my weight as I sat down, but it felt stable enough. The surface of the lake was smooth and dark, reflecting the dying light like a sheet of glass. Fishing has always been a kind of therapy for me. Cast, reel, wait. There's a rhythm to it that slows everything down. I stayed there as the last bit of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, and the only light left came from the moon. About an hour passed before the first bite. It wasn't strong, just a steady pull. I leaned forward, hands tight around the rod, heart picking up a little. But before I could reel it in, the line went slack. I cursed under my breath and started reeling the line back, expecting to find the bait gone. But it wasn't. The hook came back perfectly clean, no sign of anything having touched it. No torn bait, no weeds, nothing. I rebaited and cast again, the sound of the line slicing through the air, echoing across the still water. Another half hour passed. Nothing. The moon was high now, lighting the lake in a pale silver glow. That's when I saw it. A ripple, starting near the center of the lake, spreading outward in perfect circles. No wind, no stones tossed, no movement, just the water shifting on its own. I leaned forward, squinting. The surface shimmered faintly, like something large was moving underneath. My first thought was a big fish, maybe a catfish or something bigger. I watched closely, waiting for another sign of movement. And then, right near where the ripples began, something surfaced. At first, it looked like a piece of driftwood, long, pale, bobbing gently. But as the moonlight hit it, I realized it wasn't wood at all. It looked like a human arm. Not floating, not lifeless, but just barely breaking the surface, as if someone was right below, holding it up. I froze. The air felt heavier, colder. My first instinct was to say it was my imagination, that I had been staring too long, that the light was playing tricks on me. But it didn't fade or drift away. It stayed there, just a pale arm, motionless, reaching out of the water. I tried to tell myself to move, to reel in the line and leave, but my hands wouldn't listen. My breathing grew shallow, chest tight. I couldn't look away. Then, slowly, the arm sank, disappearing beneath the surface without a sound, and the lake went still again. For a while, I just stood there, staring at the lake. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until my chest started to burn. I forced myself to take a shaky breath, my hands trembling around the fishing rod. I told myself it had to be debris, maybe a fallen branch, or something floating up from the bottom, anything that made sense. But even as I thought it, I couldn't ignore what I'd seen, the shape, the skin, the way it had moved. I packed my gear slowly, trying to keep calm. Every sound I made seemed too loud. The creak of the old wood beneath me, the rustle of the line, even my breathing. The air had gone colder, and I could see faint mist rising from the surface of the lake. I kept glancing back at the water, half expecting that arm to reappear. The ripples had stopped completely. The lake looked like it was holding its breath. Then I heard something behind me. Not a noise exactly, just the faint sound of movement, like someone walking along the shoreline through the tall grass. I froze. My heartbeat filled my ears. I turned my head slowly, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. The beam caught nothing but the shapes of trees and reeds swaying slightly in the breeze, but the sound came again, closer this time. I tried to call out, maybe to convince myself someone else was there, another fisherman, a hiker, anyone. But no words came out. My throat was too tight. When I finally managed to move, I shone the light toward the sound again. And for the briefest second, I thought I saw someone standing just at the edge of the trees. Their shape was faint, blurred by the mist. And then they were gone. The light flickered as I swept it across the trees again, but there was nothing, just darkness and silence. I swallowed hard and turned back toward the pier, only to see the water rippling again, small circles spreading outward, right in front of where I'd been sitting. Something was moving beneath the surface, rising slowly. My whole body went tense. The ripples grew larger and the water began to bubble faintly. Then I saw it. A face, just below the surface, looking up at me. Pale, colorless, eyes open and still. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It was just there. I stumbled backward so fast I almost fell into the dirt. My flashlight slipped from my hand, landing beam first into the mud. The light pointed toward the lake, and for one moment I saw more faces under the water. 2, maybe 3, all staring upward through the surface like they were waiting. Then everything went still. The faces faded, swallowed by the dark water as if they'd never been there. I grabbed the flashlight, hands shaking, and ran for my truck. My boots hit the dirt path hard, every step echoing in the silence. I didn't look back, not once. When I reached the truck, I slammed the door, locked it, and just sat there for a while, staring through the windshield at the trees. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. That lake was still visible in the rearview mirror, a faint shimmer through the trees. And for just a second, I thought I saw movement again. Something pale standing at the edge of the pier. I must have sat there for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. The forest outside the truck was silent, heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I kept my eyes on that narrow path through the trees, watching for a movement, half expecting to see someone or something step out into the light of my headlights. Nothing did. Finally, I turned the key. The engine sputtered once before catching, the sound breaking the stillness like a scream. I pressed the gas and didn't look back. The gravel crunched under the tires as I drove away from that place, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Each time I did, I saw the faint outline of the lake between the trees, shrinking with distance. For a brief second, as the last glimpse of it disappeared behind the woods, I thought I saw a figure standing on the pier, still, watching. The drive back felt longer than usual. The road seemed darker than before, the forest on either side pressing closer, like the trees were leaning in. Every bend in the path made my pulse jump. I just wanted to get home, to get as far from that lake as possible. When I finally reached the main road, I started to feel a little calmer. The headlights caught the signs again, the faint hum of civilization returning. I told myself it had all been a trick of the light or exhaustion, or maybe just my imagination running wild in the dark. I almost believed it, until I glanced down at the passenger seat. My tackle box was open. I hadn't left it that way. The lid was slightly lifted, and the fishing line inside looked wet. Not damp from earlier, but freshly soaked, like it had just come out of the water. A faint, dark stain had formed beneath it on the seat. I didn't remember bringing anything wet into the truck. I stared at it for a long time, too afraid to reach over. Then I noticed something else. Stuck to the handle of the box was a single piece of what looked like dried vegetation. Thin, dark, and stringy. At first I thought it was lakeweed, but when I picked it up, it didn't feel like any plant I'd ever touched. It felt rough, coarse, like hair. I dropped it immediately and slammed the box shut. The rest of the drive was a blur. I don't remember the turns, or even parking the truck. When I got home, I left everything inside and went straight in, locking every door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face under the surface of the lake, staring up through the water. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that fear had twisted what I saw into something worse. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined the footprints I left on the pier, or how the boards had creaked under my weight. Because when I went back the next morning, just to prove to myself it wasn't real, the pier was gone. All that remained was the still surface of the lake, smooth, unbroken. And when I looked closer, I saw something lying half buried in the mud at the water's edge. My bait knife, the same one I'd left back in the truck. I haven't gone fishing since, but sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I still dream of that lake, of those faces just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to cast another line. I had gone fishing alone, something I used to do often to clear my head. There's a small lake about 40 minutes from where I live, hidden behind a stretch of pine trees, and an old gravel road that barely shows up on GPS. It isn't popular. Most people don't even know it's there. But that was exactly why I liked it. Quiet, calm, untouched. That evening, the sun was already dipping low when I arrived. The air smelled like wet soil and pine sap, and the water reflected the orange glow of the sky like glass. I parked near the tree line, grabbed my rod, and walked down the narrow dirt path that curved around the lake's edge. Everything was still, so still that I could hear the crunch of gravel under my boots echo like it was happening inside my head. I remember thinking it felt too quiet even for a place that remote. No birds, no insects, no sound of running water, just the faint hum of the wind brushing across the surface. I set up near a fallen log that jutted halfway into the lake. The wood was slick, soft with rot, and covered in moss. I baited my hook, cast my line, and waited. At first, it was peaceful, the kind of peace that makes your mind wander. The air cooled as the sun dropped. The ripples faded, and the water turned black as ink. Then out of nowhere, the line tugged. It wasn't a sharp pull, more like a slow, dragging resistance. I leaned forward, tightening my grip, expecting a big catch. The rod bent slightly, the line tightening just beneath the surface. I couldn't see what it was, but whatever had taken the bait was heavy. I tried reeling it in, but it didn't move. The tension in the line stayed taut, unyielding, like it was snagged on something deep below. I stood there, waiting for it to give, but it didn't. Then the line slackened, suddenly, completely. I thought it had broken, but when I reeled in, the hook was still there, bait gone. That wasn't unusual, so I rebaited and cast again. A few minutes later, the same thing happened. The exact same slow pull, the same resistance, and then the same sudden release. By the third time, I started to feel uneasy. I told myself it was probably weeds or a submerged branch. But when I reeled the line in again, the hook came up twisted, bent slightly to the side like it had been forced that way. That's when I noticed something else. There were ripples spreading slowly across the surface, coming from the center of the lake, perfectly circular, one after another, as if something large had just moved beneath the water. I stared at the spot for a long time. The ripples kept coming, and then they stopped. It was as if the entire lake took a breath and held it. That's when I decided to pack up. But as I turned to grab my bag, I heard a sound behind me. A soft movement in the water, close this time, maybe 10 feet away. When I looked back, something pale floated just beneath the surface. It wasn't a fish. It looked like a hand. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The fading light, the water's movement, it could have been anything. But then it drifted closer. The pale shape moved with a slow, deliberate motion, as if something was just beneath it, guiding it forward. The surface shimmered around it, dark and glassy, until I could make out the shape clearly. It was a hand, thin, almost gray in color, and motionless, fingers slightly curled upward. I froze. My first thought was that it was a drowned person, maybe someone who'd fallen in. But the lake wasn't deep, and no one ever came out here. I'd never seen another car parked along the road, not once. My breathing started to quicken. I remember the sound of it in my ears, shallow and uneven. I wanted to move, to run back to the truck, but part of me couldn't look away. There was something wrong about how still it was. No bubbles, no current, no sign of anything pulling it under. I took a step closer to the edge. The mud shifted beneath my boots, soft and slick. My reflection wavered beside the hand, distorted by the dark water. I could feel my pulse pounding hard enough that it made my fingers tremble when I gripped the fishing rod again. Then, slowly, the hand sank. It didn't drift down naturally. It moved with purpose, like something was pulling it, dragging it deeper until it vanished completely. The ripples spread again, faint and controlled, and then the lake was still once more. That's when I realized how dark it had gotten. The last bit of sunlight was gone behind the trees, and the reflection of the sky had turned from orange to black. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands clumsy, breath catching in my throat. When I finally got it on, the beam cut across the water, white and trembling. Nothing. Just the surface, calm and flat. I remember feeling the weight of the silence pressing on me, like the whole forest was holding its breath. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every instinct I had screamed to leave, to just walk back to the truck and never come here again. But I couldn't move. Then I saw it again. Not the hand this time, but movement. A ripple that started in the same spot as before, spreading wider, faster. The flashlight beam followed it, shaking in my grasp. Something was coming up. At first, it looked like another shape breaking through the water. But as it surfaced, I realized it wasn't just one thing. It was several. Round, pale shapes floating in a line, rising slowly, their outlines faintly visible, just beneath the reflection of the light. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was seeing. They looked like faces, half submerged. Expressionless faces, their eyes open but empty just below the surface. My breath caught in my throat. The light trembled in my hand, and I could feel sweat trickling down my neck despite the cold. Then, all at once, the water rippled violently, and everything disappeared beneath the surface again. I dropped the flashlight. It landed in the mud, beam still shining toward the lake. That's when I realized there were footsteps in the mud beside mine. Fresh ones. I stared at those footprints for what felt like forever. They were right next to mine, facing the lake, deep enough to still hold water in their impressions. I hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't seen a light, hadn't felt a presence. Yet there they were, larger than my own, spaced unevenly, as if whoever made them had been standing there only moments ago. My mouth felt dry, and I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing. Every sound seemed to fade out. The crickets, the wind, even the faint rustle of the trees. It was as if the entire place had folded in on itself, sound swallowed by something unseen. I bent down and shone the fallen flashlight toward the footprints. The light flickered across the mud, then over the water, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing out there. A silhouette on the opposite bank. No details, just a faint shape. Tall, unmoving, like a person watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. The beam shook as I picked up the flashlight again, my hand slick with sweat and mud. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I started backing away from the lake, step by step, eyes locked on the dark water. The footprints beside mine looked even fresher now, the edges crisp. Then I heard it. A faint splash. Not loud, just a single sound from the direction of the water. I turned the light back toward it. The surface was calm again, but I could see bubbles rising slowly, right where those faces had appeared before. Something was moving underneath. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran. The path back through the trees felt twice as long as before. My boots slipped on the roots, the flashlight beam jerking wildly across the trunks. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every part of me was convinced that if I did, I'd see something following just out of view. When I finally reached the truck, I slammed the door shut and locked it, sitting there for several minutes, gasping, hands gripping the steering wheel. The forest outside was completely still. My headlights illuminated only a narrow stretch of road. But for a moment, I thought I saw movement between the trees. Something pale. Something watching. I drove out of there as fast as I could, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left that place alone. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop replaying it all, the faces, the footprints, the shape across the lake. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it, that maybe the water, the fading light, the silence had all gotten to me. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I told a friend about what happened. He didn't believe me, of course, but when I mentioned the lake, he went quiet. Said his uncle used to fish there years ago. Said people stopped going after someone drowned one summer. A man who'd gone missing for days before they found him tangled in the weeds near the center. They said he'd been trying to pull something heavy out of the water. I've never gone back since. But sometimes, when I drive at night and pass through that stretch of forest, I swear I can see a shimmer of water between the trees and the faint reflection of someone standing by the shore, waiting. I've told the story a few times to friends, usually over drinks, and most of them think I made it up. I wish I had. Back then, I used to fish almost every weekend. It was my way to get out of my own head for a while. Just me, a cheap rod, and quiet water. There's a lake out near the edge of town called Marin's Hollow. It's not well known, but the locals go there sometimes to camp or swim. The water's dark, almost black in the deeper parts, and surrounded by pines that block most of the wind. One late summer evening, I decided to go there alone. I remember how still everything felt. Even before I cast the line, the air was thick, heavy with the smell of algae and old wood. The sun was setting low behind the trees, and the light turned the water this strange copper color like rust. For a while, it was peaceful. I could hear birds somewhere deeper in the forest, the faint hum of insects, the creak of my chair whenever I shifted. I remember my heartbeat slowing down, my breathing steady. It was the kind of silence that feels clean. Then it changed. It wasn't sudden, just wrong. The sounds faded out one by one until the only thing I could hear was the faint lapping of water against the shore. The air grew colder, though there was no breeze. My skin prickled, and I couldn't explain why. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a shift in temperature. I reeled in the line, checked the bait, then cast again. The float drifted lazily near the middle of the lake. A minute passed. Then another. Then the line pulled tight. At first, I thought I'd hooked something big. The rod bent hard, the reel whining as the line slipped through my fingers. My heart started racing. Whatever it was strong. I leaned back, bracing my feet in the dirt, trying to hold it steady. But the pull wasn't like a fish. It wasn't jerky or uneven. It was slow, steady, deliberate. Like something on the other end was testing me. I tried reeling in, but the drag resisted. The line trembled, taut as wire. I could feel it running deep under the water, deeper than it should have gone. Then the pull stopped completely. The line went slack. I remember staring at the still surface, my breathing shallow. The water was perfectly calm again, too calm. And then right where the line disappeared beneath the surface, I saw bubbles. Slow at first, then rising faster in a straight line toward me. The bubbles stopped a few feet from the shore. I didn't move. My hands were shaking so badly that the rod trembled. I waited for something to surface. A fish, debris, anything. But the water only rippled once, then went still again. I told myself to cut the line, but I couldn't. Curiosity held me there. I started reeling in, slow and careful, the line sliding through the water like it was caught on something soft. It felt heavy again, but not pulling this time. Just weight. When the lure broke the surface, I felt my stomach twist. Something was tangled around it. Not weeds, not fabric, something that looked like hair. Long, dark strands clinging to the hook. They glistened in the fading light. And as I lifted it closer, a thick smell hit me. Mud, salt, and something faintly sour. My first thought was that I'd snagged some kind of animal remains. The lake had been there for decades. Who knew what was at the bottom? Still, the sight made my throat tighten. I untangled the line as best I could, dropped the clump into the dirt, and wiped my hands on my jeans. That's when I noticed the air had gone completely still again. No wind, no birds, no movement at all. Even the reflection of the trees on the water seemed sharper, like the surface had turned to glass. A faint ripple moved across the lake. Just one. It started near the center and drifted toward me, slow but constant. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs now, each beat loud enough to echo in my ears. I told myself to pack up and go, but my legs didn't move. The ripple reached the shoreline and stopped. The water there darkened, deepening into a color that didn't make sense. Too black, too thick. I backed up a step. That's when I saw it. Something just beneath the surface. The shape was faint at first, almost human, lying still at the bottom, arms slightly spread. I blinked, thinking it was a reflection or shadow, but it didn't move when I shifted. It just stayed there, as if watching from below. I stared for too long. When I finally stepped back, my heel caught the bucket behind me, and it fell over, spilling bait across the ground. The sound felt too loud in the silence, and the moment it echoed, the shape beneath the water changed. It turned. Not fully, just the head, slowly, until I could see where the eyes would be. That was enough. I dropped everything and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the car. My breath came in short bursts and my chest hurt, like I'd been underwater too long. When I finally looked back, the lake was just a sliver through the trees, calm and dark, no movement at all. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, that the fading light had played tricks on my eyes. I started the engine, but before pulling out, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Through the reflection of the back window, I could still see a small patch of water between the trees. Something was there, a shape, standing at the shoreline where I'd been. It didn't move. I drove off without looking again. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that still water, the pale outline beneath it, the way it seemed to turn toward me. My thoughts wouldn't stop looping. The weight on the line, the hair, the smell, the feeling that something had been waiting down there. The next morning, my fishing gear was still in the back seat. The rod was damp. The handle left a dark mark on the upholstery, as if it had been soaked. I hadn't gone near the water since running back to the car. I hadn't even touched it. For days after, I tried to forget it. But then strange things started happening. Small things at first. My hands smelled faintly of the lake water, no matter how much I washed them. I'd wake in the night and hear what sounded like the slow drag of something wet moving just outside the window. One evening, I went to take out the trash and saw a wet trail along the pavement, leading from the direction of the woods. It stopped at my driveway. There was no rain that night. I thought about moving, but that felt ridiculous. It was a lake, a memory, nothing else. Still, I never went fishing again. I couldn't bring myself to even look at a body of water for months. Last week, though, a friend sent me a photo. He'd gone out to Marin's Hollow after hearing my story. Said he wanted to prove there was nothing strange about it. In the picture, he's standing on the bank, grinning, holding his catch. The water behind him is calm. But just below the surface, behind his legs, there's something faint. A face. Eyes wide open, staring upward. He hasn't answered my messages since. This happened about 3 summers ago. Though sometimes it still feels like last week. I'd gone out to fish alone at a lake about an hour outside town. A quiet place I'd been to dozens of times. It wasn't famous or anything. Just an old man-made lake left over from a quarry. The kind of spot you'd never find unless someone told you about it. That day had been hot, and by the time evening came around, I was looking forward to the silence. No cars, no people, just the low hum of crickets and the steady ripple of water brushing against the shore. I sat up on the far side, where the trees hung low enough to touch the surface. The air smelled like wet earth and pine needles, thick and still. I remember how peaceful it felt for the first hour. The water glowed faintly orange from the fading light, and I could hear the dull buzz of insects fading into the distance. I leaned back against the stump, breathing slow, almost hypnotized by the tiny movements of the float on my line. It was one of those rare moments that felt completely separate from the rest of the world. But the calm didn't last. Around dusk, a strange quiet settled over everything, the kind that makes your skin tighten before your mind can catch up. The insects stopped. The wind stopped. Even the water looked wrong, flat and heavy like a sheet of glass. I couldn't hear a single sound, not even my own breathing at first. I thought maybe a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. That's when I noticed it. The faint ripples, far out in the middle of the lake. Small circles expanding outward, slow and steady, like something was surfacing. I leaned forward, squinting, waiting to see a fish jump. But nothing broke the surface, just more ripples, spreading in strange, uneven lines. I felt the hair on my arms rise. I told myself it was just the current, even though there wasn't one. Then my float dipped under. Just once. I hesitated, the rod trembling slightly in my hands. The line was tight, heavier than I'd ever felt. My heart started racing. Not out of fear yet, but excitement. I pulled, expecting the usual resistance, the jerk of a fish fighting back. But there was no movement. It just felt heavy, dead weight, like I'd hooked something that wasn't alive. I reeled in slowly, the line whining in protest. Whatever it was deep, too deep. I could feel it dragging, sliding along the bottom, scraping over stones. My chest felt tight. I remember whispering, "Come on," under my breath, though I wasn't sure if I wanted it to come loose or come up. Then I saw it. Something pale broke the surface, smooth and shapeless at first, glistening in the last light of sunset. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't anything I could recognize. I froze, one hand gripping the rod, the other clutching the dirt to steady myself. The water around it started to darken, like ink spreading through it. For a moment, I thought I heard something beneath the surface, a slow movement like a long breath being drawn. I dropped the rod. I don't know why I didn't run right then. Maybe it was disbelief, or maybe I just couldn't move. I stood there staring at the water where my line had disappeared. The surface rippled once, faintly, then went still again. The float was gone. The rod lay half submerged in the mud, string still stretched out tight. The silence pressed down on me until I could hear my own heartbeat. My breathing felt uneven, shaky, too loud in the still air. I forced myself to reach down and grab the handle of the rod. The second my fingers touched it, the tension in the line vanished, completely. The reel spun freely for a moment, the string curling slack against the dirt. Whatever I'd hooked was gone. I told myself it was nothing, just a big log maybe. I reeled the rest in, careful not to look at the water too long. But as I pulled the line through my hands, something about it felt wrong. The string was slick, not wet, slick, like it had been dragged through something oily. That's when I decided to leave. I threw everything into my bucket, bait, tools, the half-empty thermos, and started up the narrow trail that led back to my car. The forest around the lake had grown darker than it should have for that hour. The path felt longer than usual, too. I remember my footsteps being the only sound, dry leaves crunching beneath my boots, the faint rasp of fabric as I brushed past low branches. Every so often, I thought I heard something else, just behind me. A soft shift of weight, like another pair of feet trying to match my steps. Each time I stopped, the sound stopped too. By the time I saw my car through the trees, my throat was dry. I was almost running when I reached it. I threw everything into the back seat and started the engine right away. The headlights lit up the trees, and for a split second I thought I saw someone standing by the waterline. They were facing the lake, motionless, their reflections stretching thin over the surface. I blinked, and they were gone. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. Even with the radio on, I could feel that same pressure in my chest, like the silence from the lake had followed me back. When I got home, I left all my gear in the trunk. I didn't even turn on the lights when I went inside. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shape rising from the water again, the pale thing that wasn't a fish, that didn't belong there. At some point, I heard a faint sound from outside, not loud, just distant, wet, like something dragging along concrete. I told myself it was rain, though the forecast had been clear. I didn't look out the window. In the morning, I found water pooled beneath my car. It wasn't oil. It smelled like the lake. I told myself it had to be a leak, even though it didn't make sense. The puddle under my car wasn't from the radiator or fuel line. It was clear, almost clean-looking, except for a faint green tint when the light hit it. I crouched down to check, but the smell stopped me. It was the same smell from the lake. Wet soil, algae, and something faintly metallic. I didn't touch it. I just stood there for a long time, staring at the water, feeling that same pressure in my chest again. That same silence. Later that day, I went back to the trunk to get my gear. I was thinking of throwing it all away just to be done with it. When I opened it, I saw that my fishing rod was still damp. It had been 2 days. There shouldn't have been any moisture left, but the handle glistened under the light. My lure was gone too. The end of the line was cut clean, like something had bitten through it. That night, I dreamed about the lake. I was sitting on the same patch of dirt, holding the same rod, and the water was completely black. No stars, no reflection. Just a still surface that looked solid. Then the float dipped once, like before, and when I pulled the line, it felt the same. Heavy, slow, too alive. I saw something rise to the surface, but I couldn't make out its shape. Only when it lifted closer did I realize I wasn't looking at a fish at all. It was a face. The eyes were open. They looked like mine. I woke up covered in sweat, my chest heaving, air burning in my throat. It was just a dream, I told myself over and over. Just a dream. But when I went outside in the morning, I saw the puddle again. Larger this time, stretching from under the car toward the street as if something had crawled away during the night. I moved a month later. I sold the car, left most of my old things behind. I haven't gone fishing since. Still, sometimes when it rains, I hear that faint sound of water sliding against the pavement, and my heart starts racing before I even realize why. A few weeks ago, a friend sent me a video. It was someone fishing at the same lake. The footage was grainy, but in one of the last frames, right before it cut off, I saw something in the water, something pale drifting toward the surface, almost human. And behind it, half buried in the mud, was a familiar fishing rod. Mine. This happened about 5 years ago, and I still don't have an explanation for it. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in ghosts, or curses, or whatever you want to call the things that hide between reality and imagination. But that night, out by the old reservoir, something changed the way I see everything. I used to go fishing a lot, alone mostly. It was my way of clearing my head after long work days. The reservoir wasn't exactly legal to fish in, but no one really cared. It was quiet, tucked behind a stretch of forest that barely anyone visited anymore. The kind of place where your phone signal dies, and the air smells like wet rust and pine sap. That night, the moon was thin and sharp, like it was slicing through the clouds. I remember the water being so still that it reflected every small movement I made. The only sounds were my boots pressing into the damp soil and the faint hum of insects. I sat up near the broken dock, a few rotting planks still clinging to the old posts that jutted out of the water. The first hour was uneventful. I didn't catch anything, but I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. There was something peaceful about the way the line disappeared into the black water, like it was reaching into another world. I leaned back on my folding chair, eyes half closed, listening to the faint ripples brushing against the dock. Then I noticed it. The water had gone completely still. No ripples, no sound. Even the insects had gone silent. I sat up, confused. There was a strange heaviness in the air, like the pressure before a storm, but the sky was clear. I reeled in the line to check my bait, and as I did, I noticed something just under the surface. A shape, pale and slow-moving. At first, I thought it was a big fish, maybe a catfish, maybe something else. But the way it moved didn't look right. It wasn't swimming, it was drifting, almost like it was being pulled by a current that I couldn't see. I remember shining my flashlight toward it. The beam cut through the water, and for a second, I saw something. Skin, not scales. Pale like candle wax. I jerked back so fast, I nearly fell off the dock. When I looked again, the water was empty, perfectly still. I should have packed up right then, but curiosity is a stupid thing. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was probably just a log or reflection. So I threw the line back out, pretending everything was normal. but the air never went back to how it was. The stillness started to feel wrong, unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. My own breathing grew shallow, louder in my ears than it should have been. Every small sound I made, the creak of my chair, the zip of my jacket, felt too sharp, too clear. Then I felt the tug. It was sudden and strong, jerking the rod forward so hard it almost flew from my hands. My pulse kicked. I held tight, leaning back, expecting a big one. But whatever was on the other end didn't fight like a fish. It didn't thrash or pull side to side. It just dragged, slow, steady, and heavy. I started reeling in, every muscle in my arm straining. The line sliced through the water, tighter than it had ever been. I could see it cutting through the reflection of the moonlight, closer and closer to the surface. Then something broke through. A hand. White, bloated, fingers curled around my line. I froze, the reel still spinning uselessly under my thumb. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. The hand just hung there, half submerged, knuckles glinting in the light, and then, slowly, it started to pull. I don't know how long I just stood there, holding the rod like an idiot, while that pale hand gripped the line. My heart felt like it had climbed up into my throat. Every instinct I had screamed to let go, to run, but I couldn't. I was caught between fear and disbelief, trying to convince myself I wasn't seeing what I thought I was. Then, as slow as it appeared, the hand began to sink back beneath the surface. The tension in the line loosened, and the reel spun uselessly in reverse. I finally dropped the rod, stumbling backward onto the dirt. My flashlight rolled away, its beam spinning wildly across the ground, then landing on the water. Nothing. Just ripples. For a long time, I didn't move. My breathing came uneven and rough, my palms slick with sweat. The air smelled different now, like algae and rot. Every breath I took felt heavy, like I was inhaling something old. I forced myself to grab the flashlight and sweep it across the reservoir. The beam caught the half-broken dock, the empty chair, the faint fog rolling off the water. But then, just near the far edge, I saw movement. Not the hand, something taller. A shape standing waist-deep in the reservoir, motionless. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. The beam wavered in my shaking hand. It looked like a person, but the proportions were wrong. Too long in the arms, the head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if it were studying me. I remember whispering to myself, "No, no, no, it's just the light." But when I took a step back, the shape moved too, smoothly, without a sound, keeping the same distance. That was enough. I grabbed my tackle box and started to pack up, hands fumbling over the lures and lines. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears that I could barely think. I remember the crunch of gravel under my boots, every step sounding like it was echoing miles away. Halfway up the trail, I stopped to look back. I wish I hadn't. The figure was gone from the water, but my chair, the one I'd been sitting on, was no longer empty. Someone was sitting there. I couldn't see their face, just the outline against the dull reflection of the moon. Shoulders slightly hunched, head lowered, like they were waiting for the line to pull again. I don't remember running, but somehow I made it to my car. My hands shook so badly that I dropped the keys twice before getting the door open. When the headlights came on, I caught one last glimpse of the reservoir through the trees. The water looked normal again, quiet, harmless. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hand rising from the water, fingers tightening on the line. A few days later, I told one of my friends, Mark, what happened. He laughed it off, said I'd probably fallen asleep and dreamed it. Still, he offered to go out there with me that weekend to prove it was nothing. I almost said no, but part of me needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. So we went back. The sun was just setting when we arrived. Everything looked the same, except for one thing. My fishing rod was gone. The chair was gone too. In their place, near the edge of the dock, lay a single shoe, muddy, waterlogged, half buried in the silt. It wasn't mine. Mark thought it was funny at first. He nudged the shoe with a stick, said maybe some drunk had wandered down here. I tried to laugh with him, but the sound came out flat. The air felt wrong again, heavy, like the moment before something breaks. We set up near the same spot where I'd been before. The water looked calm, almost too calm, the surface smooth as glass. Mark tossed his line in, humming to himself, while I stood there, pretending to help, but really just watching the water. I couldn't stop thinking about that hand, that shape in the fog. Probably just an animal, Mark said, breaking the silence. A big one, maybe. You scared yourself. I wanted to believe him. But I couldn't forget how human it looked. The curve of the fingers, the skin's pale color. I could still feel that pull through the line, steady and unnatural, like something deliberate. The sky dimmed faster than I expected. The forest shadows stretched across the bank until everything turned the same dull gray. The insects had gone quiet again. I noticed it before Mark did. No chirping, no rustling, no sound but the faint lapping of water against the dock. Mark frowned. You hear that? He said, though there was nothing to hear. That's when his line went tight. He grinned, braced his feet, and started reeling in. See? Probably your monster, he said, laughing under his breath. But the sound faded as the rod bent further, too far, the tip trembling under the weight. What the hell? I stepped closer, my stomach twisting. The line was cutting through the water, dragging toward the center of the reservoir. Whatever it was strong. Mark tried to adjust the drag, but the reel whined uselessly. Then it stopped. Just stopped. Feels snagged, he said, crouching down to check the tension. But the line wasn't snagged. It was moving again, slowly, back toward us. He looked up, and for a second, neither of us breathed. The surface rippled, bubbles rising in a straight line, coming closer. I could see something beneath it, pale and shifting. I whispered his name, but he didn't answer. The line went slack. Mark reeled fast, pulling in what looked like empty water until something broke the surface. It wasn't a fish. It was fabric, dark, waterlogged, and clinging to something solid beneath. He hesitated, then leaned forward to grab it. Before I could say anything, he froze. His hand hovered inches from the water. I could see his reflection in the ripples, his face twisted in confusion, then fear. It's got my hook, he muttered. He jerked backward, almost falling. Something grabbed me, he shouted, scrambling to his feet. I saw it then. The edge of his sleeve was soaked, as if something had reached out from below and caught him. The water churned once violently, then went still again. Completely still. Mark stared at the surface, breathing hard. We're done, he said, voice shaking. I'm not staying here another second. We packed everything in silence. The moment we turned to leave, I glanced back one last time. There, near the middle of the reservoir, a small ripple moved outward, slow, deliberate. At its center, something pale floated up. It looked like a face. We didn't speak on the drive home. Mark kept glancing at the rearview mirror, even though there was nothing behind us but darkness and trees. The smell of the reservoir seemed to cling to us, muddy, metallic, faintly sour. I rolled down the window just to breathe air that didn't taste like something dead. When I got home, I showered twice. The image of that pale face wouldn't leave my mind. The way it surfaced, slowly, like it knew we were watching, felt deliberate. Its eyes had been open, I was sure of it, open and looking right at me. I didn't sleep again that night. Every creak of the house made my body tense. I kept thinking I heard the faint drag of water somewhere, like something being pulled across tile. I told myself it was just the pipes, the wind, anything but what I'd seen. The next morning, I called Mark. No answer. I texted, waited, called again. Still nothing. Around noon, I drove to his place. His truck was in the driveway. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was quiet. His fishing gear was still by the door, rod leaning against the wall, line still wet. The floor near the entryway had small patches of mud, smeared as if someone had walked through barefoot. I followed them halfway to the kitchen before stopping. The smell hit me first, stale water and rot, the same smell from the reservoir. The back door was open. Beyond it, leading into the yard, the muddy prints continued. One set, then another, overlapping, like someone had come in and someone else had gone out. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? That something from the water followed us home. That it had found him? I backed out, closed the door, and drove away without looking back. Later that week, I checked the news every day. No reports, no missing person notice, nothing. It was like Mark had never existed. I went back to the reservoir once more, though I don't really know why. Maybe I needed to see it empty, to convince myself it was just a shared hallucination. But it wasn't empty. My chair was back, set up neatly at the same spot I'd been sitting that first night. The fishing rod rested across it, line cast into the water, motionless. The air was still, thick, almost expectant. I stood there for a long time, too afraid to go closer, but unable to leave. Then I saw it, just beneath the surface, a pale shimmer, drifting slowly toward the line. It looked like a hand. The reel twitched once. I turned and left without touching anything. I don't fish anymore. I can't. Sometimes when I drive past a lake or see water at night, I swear I feel that same heaviness in the air, the kind that makes your heart beat loud in your ears. And every now and then, I dream of that reservoir. In the dream, I'm standing on the dock, holding a rod, the water still as glass. Then I feel the line go tight, and I know before I even look down, something on the other end is pulling me in. And this time, I don't think I'll be able to let go.